Kim Eddleston. And today I'm here with a family business guru who really doesn't need to be introduced, Professor Dennis Jaffe. Dennis is a senior research fellow at BanyanGlobal and the author of several incredibly popular family business books. He's a longtime researcher and consultant in the field. Today, we'll be talking about his amazing book that every family business and every family business consultant should have. It's Borrowed from Your Grandchildren, The Evolution of 100-Year Family Enterprises. Thanks for being with me, Dennis.
I'm delighted. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to share it and to have a dialogue with you about these ideas.
So what inspired you to write this book?
Well, first of all, I made 7 years ago a very good career move, which is I retired. And so when you retire, you have a big hole in your life where work used to be. And so I asked myself, what is it that I think is really important in this field that I haven't been able to do? And I was interested in a couple of things. First of all, a lot of research, talks about what's the average family, and what I'm interested in, and the kind of research that I do, is about exemplars. It's like the book Good to Great, looking at not just the average family business, because no one wants to be the average, but what are the best. And so the challenge was, how do we locate the best families? And I came upon three criteria to kind of find those families. One is that they were past the third generation and approaching 100 years. The second is that they were successful as both a connected family and as a business. They weren't just investors who happened to be related. And the third is that they were large and thriving, not just as a single business, but sometimes they sell the business, they become a family office, they have a series of enterprises. So I wasn't just studying the business, I was really studying families, not businesses, and the businesses were there. And so I was also interested in two other things, that a lot of the research is kind of based in the US, and people are beginning to say, well, that's a kind of an Anglo-Saxon, that's an American thing. And so I wanted to make it a global study. I tell stories of what people are doing. So when they say, well, we have a family council, you can see what it is they mean and what they're doing and what it looks like. So the book is full of stories. And so I went around the world several times over a 5-year period and interviewed 100 families that were pretty much over 600 or 800 million in net worth, that had been together for past the third generation and that were thriving. And I talked to a member of an elder generation and a member of the younger generation, and I basically asked them to tell their stories and what they had done, and for them to look back from the fourth generation and say, what did you do in the first generation that made a difference? And that's how I did the research. And the research turned out, I didn't intend to, and the publisher wasn't very happy, but it turns out to be a 400-page book because it's full of stories about these families. And I couldn't not tell the stories and not give a sense of the variety of these families. So it isn't like there's one principle. There's so many principles and themes that I identified, but in some way, I was absolutely astounded that there were some core principles that hold literally in every continent, in every culture, all over for all kinds of industries and all kinds of families, and that's what I wrote about.
Well, you're going to tell us, what was it? What was that secret ingredient?
The first one, which was a little bit of a surprise, which is that the families made two major decisions. The first decision wasn't really a decision. It was a fact. They created a great business, and the business was productive and profitable and produced a lot of wealth, more wealth than the family needed. But then these families all made another decision, and that is that they wanted to use their wealth to create a great family. There's another big theme that came out, is that these families saw that they wanted to organize not just the business activities, but they also wanted to have a parallel organization in the family. That because they had this wealth and they had all these family members and they wanted them to develop and grow and they wanted to do all these wonderful things, and they had family ranches and foundations and things like that. They wanted to create a family organization that would be parallel to their business. So these were basically two-tiered, I call them two-pillar organizations. A third thing, and this is something that I know is very close to your heart, is that these were families that really balanced not just the need to be professional and to run a professional business where they hired advisors and professional members, but also had to be innovative. And the challenge in these families is, where does innovation come from? And I made an amazing discovery, which is that it isn't about the sources of innovation and new ideas in families come from the next generation. And the challenge in these families is to balance three components: the elders that have the power and that have a legacy, values, and a kind of their way, and they've been very successful. The advisors who have their own way and their own professionalism, and then also the voice of the new generation. These families are continually innovating. Every generation, they're reinventing themselves. They're selling their business. They're creating family offices. They're investing in new things. And businesses are not, and families particularly, are not set up to be reinventing themselves. So it's a real challenge. And that's some of the things I see in these families.
So what advice do you have on raising that next generation of leaders to be like this, to be so innovative?
The idea, if you want someone to be responsible, what do? You trust them, you invite them in, you get engaged with them, you do things with them. And basically the key is engagement, not setting up structures and things to create responsibility. And so the families that we see have a great ability to talk across generations. The elders, parents are certainly, they have a lot of ideas and a lot of experience, but they're also able to listen, and they're able to listen and respectfully listen to the new generation. Say, well, if this is what you want to do, let's figure out a way to do it. Engaged. These families are very engaged. They spend a lot of time together. They don't want family members going off in all directions. They want to have a shared focus. This is where they have shared values. They have a structure. They have a set of principles that they agree on. They really spend a lot of time working together.
In your book, you talk about transmitting these shared values and building the shared culture. So why are they important, and how are some of these businesses, these families, better able to do it?
I asked each of these families, the last thing in the interview, I said, what was the most important thing? What was the one thing that you would say to a family that in the first, second generation that wanted to become a 100-year family? And by a factor about 3-1, the main advice I said was, get people aligned on values. And by that, they mean not just words, they said really talking together about what do we believe and what do we want to do together. And the idea of values is really linked to the idea that these families created a strong and an open and an innovative and a creative culture. I keep finding that it's a culture of the business, in their family office, but there's also a culture of the family. Communicating, meeting, working together, learning, valuing each other, having accountability. These are part of the family culture as well as the business culture.
That's amazing. And you're talking about businesses that are at least in their third generation.
And that was what was interesting. So when we think of it has to do with the definition of family. So when I first asked them about their family, I was very, very surprised when they kind of scratched their head and said, what do you mean? My wife, my kids, my parents, that's my household, my nuclear family. But then I also have an extended family. And I had to, and what we're talking about in third generation is not a nuclear family. I call that a household to differentiate it from an extended family. And so they were talking about creating family among maybe 200 cousins, maybe even more. And that's a challenge because, as we know, people don't agree on much, and the more connected you are, the more you find disagreements rather than agreement.
Are they creating events? Are they having a lot of reunions?
You can't be a family unless you get together, and you can't be a family unless you know each other. So these families start actually when they're children. They have annual meetings or every other year. And in COVID times, it's been a real challenge, but these families spend a lot of time on Zoom, and they have a lot of committee meetings and task forces and groups and events, and they even have kind of Zoom parties. There's a lot of engagement, even across distance.
So it sounds like a lot of them, they're being raised with a really strong identity. Like, this is who we are. And then they're creating these bonds where the cousins enjoy one another. They get to know one another's strengths. And like you mentioned, trust. The importance of building this trust among the generations and between the generations is magic.
So every generation has to make a new commitment and say, we are going to do this for another generation. And some families, I think we have professionally, we've hinted to say that if you don't do it and if you don't stay together, there's something wrong with it. But that's not true. If you have like 800 people in your family, for example, several of the families said, well, we have too many people. We're going to break up into branch groups. And one family, for example, had 7 different branches, and they said, well, we're going to create 5 different family offices. And other families sell the business. And when they sell the business, they have to come together and say, well, now let's look. We have this big check. Do we want to invest together? Is this make sense for us? Do we have a shared vision? Do we want to be together? And there's a choice. There's a lot of choice points for families where sometimes a family can say, I love you all, but I want to start my own business. 100 families. Not one of these 100 families contained all of the blood relatives. They all had a process by which some family members would exit. And so as our colleague Jay Hughes says, these were families of affinity. They were blood relations who chose to be together.
Oh, I love that. So it sounds like you really came upon some secret recipes and formulas, although there's multiple, which I love, this magic. Did you find, were they willing to talk about any hiccups along the way, or any common problems sometimes they had to deal with? And then obviously they got back on track.
For example, they talked about having to have a conflict resolution mechanism where they came differences. They had to have accountability. And sometimes, for example, the younger generation had to get together and call out someone who'd been there for a long time who was not performing. They had to do tough things, and they needed to trust each other enough to do that. There were issues around business accountability and personal relationship. There was issues of fairness, favoritism for your own kids, things like that. And these families all had an ability to deal with these things openly.
Absolutely amazing. All right. Any last words of wisdom, particularly if it's a younger family business or a business that needs to get on the right path?
The thing is, if you're an elder or a sibling in the second generation, is to begin to talk across generations about what you want, about what's happening, about what the future is, and it's about just start with engagement, and then the governance and the principles and the values and the decisions will come out of that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dennis. I'm sure you've helped a lot of family businesses today. I highly, highly recommend any of his books, but this book is borrowed from your grandchildren, The Evolution of 100-Year Family Enterprises. Incredibly inspirational. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for doing this, Kim, and it was a wonderful opportunity, and it's a wonderful thing that you do.